Hello everyone and welcome to our week 3 live classroom. Today we will be reviewing just a little bit from week 2 and going over what to expect for this week and then our chapter reading. So before we get started, do you guys have any questions from last week?
Not really.
Okay, sounds good. In Slack I saw a lot of really good participation, so that made me happy. One thing in regards to Slack, everyone please make sure to upload your profile pictures to your Slack profile if you have not already. So what that looks like, here's our Slack workspace. If I just click on the workspace name up here, I can click on profile and account. And then once I have that, you can edit profile and upload an image right here and save those changes. So if you haven't done that, please do so we can all see your beautiful faces. And then I got some questions about your peer review journals, but I got a lot of really good messages this last week. This will be happening for the rest of the semester, okay? And all I really want to know is how you're doing, okay? If you want to talk about the peer review discussion boards, you can, or about specific things that you've learned, you can. But really, I just want to see how you're doing. If you have any questions, things that we need to talk about, things that didn't make sense to you, things you're struggling with, things like that. So that's just a little bit on your peer review journals. Okay. Comments about week 2 assignments. Okay, so had a bunch of people asking a couple of these questions. One was, how important are the semicolons? Okay, let's just say that to write valid JavaScript code, you have to have semicolons at the end of your statements. Okay. Now, with that said, our browsers nowadays are pretty nice and they kind of help us work through different things. So if a developer forgets to put a semicolon, it is very likely, depending on the browser, that the browser will handle that for him and basically insert that semicolon for them. But you do need semicolons at the end of your statements. Text editors and tablets. I brought this up earlier in the semester, but don't try to do this class on a tablet or a cell phone. You want a computer and you want a good text editor, okay? The two that I kind of recommend using for this class, one is called Visual Studio Code, which is fantastic. You can see I have my 160 programs folder open right here, and I can go into any one of these and see all my HTML files. And so it stores it in one place. You'll be able to use these on your exams, and so it's really easy. If I wanted to look at one, I can just click on it and look at it. You know, there's also syntax highlighting and things like that, which really help you out. And so yeah, make sure to have a good text editor. Again, this is Visual Studio Code, and also Sublime Text is a really good option as well. Let's see, control structures. All right, had a couple of questions about this. By default, okay, and this is going a little bit into JavaScript, but by default, anytime I have JavaScript, I will put it into the script tags of an HTML file, okay? And by default, my code will run from top to bottom, and that is a control structure, you know, basically saying how the code is going to get executed. All right. Now, let's say up here, I had a function called get circumference, or let's say like calculate circumference. Should have done something I didn't know how to spell. And then in here, let's say I had a var radius equals 5 or something like that. I could call calculate circumference. And I could maybe, you know, pass in that radius or whatever. But this is a different control structure, okay? It's gonna by default run from top to bottom in my program, but as soon as I call a function, it will break that rule. It's not gonna run from top to bottom anymore. It's gonna jump up to calculate circumference, and I might have a few lines of code in here and say return, you know, 30 or whatever the circumference was, you know, and it would basically jump from here back to where that function call was made. You know, so that is one example of a control structure. Another control structure that we have an example of is if I have like an if statement. I could say if radius is greater than 0, then I want to call this function or something like that. This is another control structure because if radius isn't greater than 0, then this won't get touched. So it's not by default top to bottom, but I can add some logic in here to say how I want my program to run. Okay, and there are several others that we'll go into, but these are the two biggest ones. You know, just functions and then if statements. All right. One other one is if I had some type of a loop. Okay. Now this might look something like this. While I is less than 10, I could say I is equal to 0. And while I is less than 10, I will increment I. Okay. And then whatever happens inside of this code will get repeated 10 times. Okay. I will increment once at the end of every time this code runs. And then if I is still less than 10 at the end of that, then we'll run that code again. All right. So that is another example of a control structure. Okay. Now, this moved backward 4. Okay. So a lot of people were wondering, hey, with the Robbie the robot, why couldn't I just type in 4 into a function and have it execute that function multiple times? Okay. And if I was going to look into this, you know, what that is called is a parameter. Okay. So I could put something up in here called radius inside of the parentheses of a function. And then I could use that piece of data in here. I could be like, oh, I'm going to return radius times 2 times pi. I don't remember what the function is, but basically I can use that radius as a variable inside of that function. Okay. Now right here I could call that r or whatever, you know, and then I could just pass that in, and that won't pass in the variable r, it'll pass in the value of that variable. So in this case, the value would be 5, and I could pass that up into radius. All right. Well, let's say inside of our move forward function, I just have something that says a statement that will move the robot forward 1 space. You know, maybe it's called robot move forward 1 or something like that. And maybe that would call another function that we aren't aware of. All right. Now, if I wanted this to go multiple times, then I'd have to have, you know, maybe like a number of times value up here. And so I could pass in like a 4 or whatever. And then in here, I could just make a simple loop. I could say for I equals 0, while I is less than number of times, I plus plus. And then inside of that loop, I would put that function to move Robbie 1 space forward. Okay, so the short answer of why this didn't work is because the function wasn't written, you know, move Robbie X number of times. It didn't take a parameter, and so it didn't have a loop or something like that. Instead, it just said, hey, every time you call that function, we're going to move them forward 1. Okay, but it would be very possible to write a function like this. Says, you know, move Robbie multiple times, and then you pass in the number of times, and then for that many times, we'll just move him forward 1. You know, that is something that we could do. It's just something that wasn't coded into your guys' exercise last week. Okay. All right. Any questions about week 2? Or Robbie the Robot, journals, Slack, anything from week 2? Okay. Well, then let's dive into week 3. So week 3 deliverables, your chapter 3 review questions are due tonight. Write in HTML a business summary. Okay, your initial submission is due Wednesday night. So the same way that we used Slack, let me close that. So the same way that we used Slack last week, where you know, you write a rough draft for something and then you'll post it to the week 2 peer review discussion board, and then people can comment on it and things like that. We're gonna do the same thing for week 3. Okay, but this time you're going to be submitting your HTML code. All right, and then people can run that code. Now, let me show you guys a couple of quick tips. So let's say I wrote up my code. Let's say this was it, and I wanted to paste all of this onto that discussion board. I could come into here, and instead of just pasting it, I can click on this little link right here. It says code block, and then I'll paste it, and I can submit that. Okay, and now you can see it kind of rendered it a little bit. It kept like my tabs and my spacing and things like that, and that'll make it really easy if anybody wants to run it. Okay, so if I did want to run this and see what one of my classmates did, I could just copy this code, come to my text editor, hit Control N, and paste it, and then I have to save it. Okay, I'll just save it in my downloads folder, but I would save this as an HTML file so that I can actually run it. Okay, once it's saved as an HTML file, it'll show that syntax highlighting, and then I can right click on this, hit copy path, then I can come over into my browser and run it. And you can see this is what my file looks like being ran. all right? So that's one way. The other way that you can do it if you want to is you can actually just attach your file, okay? And then if somebody just downloads your file, they won't have to save it as an HTML file. It'll be an HTML file and they can just run it, okay? So whatever you prefer for that, okay? Any questions about the peer review discussion board expectations for this week? Okay, so you'll have your initial submission, your rough draft, so to speak, due Wednesday night. You'll have to do your peer review comments by Thursday night, and then you'll submit your final code submission in iLearn on Friday night. Okay, and then you'll have your peer review journal and self-assessment stuff that's due on Saturday. All right, chapter 3, HTML basics. Now, if you've never seen HTML before and you start looking at it, you might be a little overwhelmed, thinking, what on earth is this? Okay, again, software needed to write your code. You'll need a text editor, Sublime or VS Code, and then a browser. This entire semester, I will be using Google Chrome, and I highly recommend that you use Google Chrome, especially when we start getting into debugging JavaScript code. That's when it'll be really important that you have Google Chrome up and running. Okay. So, HTML basics. All right. What I do anytime I need a refresher on HTML is I just go into Google and I say HTML tutorial. W3 Schools is an amazing resource, okay? And it's also something that you guys can use on your exams, all right? But if you look at this, there's an example of a very simple HTML document. It says try it yourself. I can click on this and see what this code looks like being rendered. Now, if I want to mess around a little bit, I could copy this and paste it a bunch and run it again, and I could see what that looks like being rendered. All right, so this is a really quick way to just test out code and see what it looks like. All right, for your assignment for this week, if I go over to our calendar, let's see, we're in week 3. Submit final code, HTML basics. Let's look what your assignment is. All right, so create and validate a well-formed HTML5 document that advertises a business that you own or would like to start. The document must include at least one heading and 2 paragraphs. So if I come over here, if I take this out and I copy this, okay, that meets the requirements for my HTML document. Okay, I would need a couple more of the required elements in here, like it's listed in your book. All right, but I would just change this heading to be like, you know, the best restaurant in the world, or whatever I want to advertise. And then I could have a couple paragraphs talking about my restaurant, you know. And that's pretty much it. If you want to try throwing in an image or something like that, you totally can. You don't have to. Create and validate a well-formed document that contains 2 text fields, a button, and a div in that order. Okay, so if I didn't know how to make a text field, all right, I would look through this HTML resource that I have up right here, all right? Or I would just Google HTML text field. And W3 Schools will probably be the first thing that comes up, but I can look at this and I see, oh, I have an input and another input. You know, if I have just an input type text, it'll actually allow me to type in something. It's a text field, all right? Or if I just had, you know, like a button, if I wanted to figure out how to do a button in HTML, then I could just Google HTML button and I could test it out here in W3 Schools and see what it looks like, you know? So W3 Schools is fantastic, all right? If you want to do, you know, inputs or buttons, there's this whole list of stuff over here that you can learn if you want to. Or if you decided you wanted to throw in an image, you can be like, oh, it's just a simple link like that, and I have to have like the URL from Google Images or wherever it is, and that's it, you know? But you can totally do whatever you want with that as long as you meet these requirements, okay? Any questions on your assignments this week? Okay, hopefully silence is a good thing. I'll just hope that means that you don't have any questions. Okay, now let's really look at HTML. Now that I've shown you guys some examples of what it actually looks like, let's go into a little bit of depth as to what each element looks like that we're looking at here. So an element in HTML has a number of things. It will have an opening tag, which consists of this lesser than sign and a greater than sign. Okay, they kind of like open up and close, and it shows everything inside that opening tag. And there's also a closing tag. there are a couple of differences between an opening and a closing tag. One is the closing tag will have a / before the name of the element, okay? Another one is the opening tag will have attributes in it. Okay, you don't put attributes in the closing tag. They'll only be in the opening tag, and they will apply to everything between the two tags, okay? So at this point, I have at high altitude, bake at 50 degrees higher, okay? Then, you know, this class note and this ID will be applied to everything inside these tags, the opening tag and the closing tag. So here are some common HTML elements. Most of these you will end up writing throughout the semester, okay? Doc type HTML shows that a certain file will be an HTML document, okay? Now, we save them as HTML files, and this is one of the things that your browser will help you out with, but in order to have well-formed HTML that will pass HTML validators, you have to have it. This is a comment, all right? So comments in code, if at any point I wanted to write a comment, I might be like, this paragraph is for the following purpose, or something like that. I might have a comment. This isn't going to be rendered by the computer. It's just for the programmer, the web developer to see, okay? So that's what comments look like. Now this can continue for as many lines as I want it to, okay? And it'll stay as a comment until it finds these 3 magic characters, this hyphen, hyphen, greater than sign, all right? And that's how I open it, okay? All right. Back over here. This HTML tag, all right, if I look back at my program right here, you can see I have an HTML tag, and everything inside of my program is inside of that, okay? And anytime I have something inside of another element in HTML, I like to hit my tab button, all right? I can select this entire head right here, and I can hit tab to decide where I want to put that, okay? But usually, you know, if I have something that's right inside of another element, then I will just hit tab once. So I wouldn't want it lined up right there. I want to show that it's inside of my HTML tag, and so I just hit tab, all right? Well, all of these are inside my head tag, and so I'll hit tab on those, okay? All of these are inside my body tag, and so I hit tab on all of these, okay? Well, these paragraphs are inside of my div tag, and so you get the point. Each time I have something inside of something else, I'll hit tab so I can easily see where things are in my program, okay? Now, the rest of these, you know, they're really important. Head, that's where we'll put all of our JavaScript stuff. You know, I showed you guys in this piece of code that here's the head of my document, and inside of it, I have a script tag, and that's where I'll put all of my JavaScript, you know. But it's also where I'll put my styles if I have any styles that I want to use. Body, that's what is actually going to show on the page. All right, so if I have a paragraph or a header or a div, those would all be inside of the body, okay? And then just a few others that you guys can look through. There are more than this, but these are just kind of the most common ones that we're going to look at this semester. All right, case sensitivity. Now, if you're writing in HTML, it is totally legal, let me go back over here, to go like this. All right, now that looks kind of funky, all right, but it still says HTML, and because HTML is not case sensitive, I could come over here, let me copy this file path again. I'm just going to copy the path and stick it up here in my browser. It still worked just fine. Okay, it looks exactly the same as the last time I ran it. Okay, and I could change this to all caps if I wanted to and run it again, and it still works just fine. Okay, now coding convention states that all of these tags should be lowercase except for this doc type HTML. All right, but the rest of these tags you should just leave lowercase. Along with the attributes of an element, you should just leave them lowercase. But it would work if I decided to do something like that. All right, that is horribly ugly, but it would work, okay, because HTML is not case sensitive. All right, now what isn't case sensitive is JavaScript. So if you tried this last week in your Robbie the Robot exercise, if you tried typing in move forward with a capital M, it didn't work because the computer will see this move forward and this move forward as 2 completely different things. Even though they look really similar to us, it would recognize them as 2 different functions. So technically, if I wanted a function called move forward all lowercase and move forward all caps locks, I could. All right, that wouldn't be very smart, but I could if I wanted to, because it'll recognize those as different functions. Okay, so in your documents, everything is going to be HTML except for what is inside of this script tag. All right, that is where our JavaScript goes. All right, everything else is going to be HTML. All right, but in here, if I try to do like div or something like that, my text editor should show me a nice little red line, be like, I have no idea what you're talking about because I'm looking for JavaScript, and that is something in HTML. All right, but it would recognize something like a function declaration or something like that. It would say, oh, you need a name for that function or whatever, but it would recognize these things. Whereas if I put this down here, then it would just print function name, parenthesis, parenthesis, bracket, bracket onto the page because it's recognizing HTML here, not JavaScript. All right. I'm going kind of fast, you guys, but do you guys have any questions up to this point?
Yes, sorry, I have one question. I don't really understand the element div, how that works. So for what purpose I can use the div element?
Sorry, the which element?
Div.
Oh, the div. Yeah. So the div is basically what's going to be used to, it can be used for a couple of things. One, it can separate pieces of logic in your code. Okay. So for example, right here I have a div with an ID of unique paragraph. All right. And then I have a couple of paragraphs, right? And then my div ends. Now, if I wanted to style this differently, I could come up into here and I could say style, and I could say unique paragraph, right? And that will isolate this ID down here, this unique paragraph ID, okay? And then in here I could say color is pink or something like that, all right? Now, if I ran this again and refreshed it, you could see it isolated those two paragraphs and it changed the style and it applied it to that div and everything inside of that div, all right? Or I could be like font size 200%. If I ran it again and just refreshed, you can see it doubled the size of that font just inside that div. So that's one big thing. Div is short for divider, all right? And so I can kind of divide up my document and add styles and different things the way that I want to, all right? Another thing that we'll use divs for is to get and retrieve and post data, all right? And we'll go more into that next week, but if I look at one of the programming assignments for next week, you can see I have a div with an ID of output, all right? And then up in my code of my function, I say get element by ID, output div, which matches this ID, and I can put text into that div once I run a JavaScript function, all right? And that's what we're going to be using it for the most this semester, is to put data on the page from our JavaScript functions. So if I had a function called like get circumference, I could have the user type in a radius, and then I could be like, oh, in my output div ID, I want to put the circumference or whatever, and then I could have that output to the page to the user to see. Okay.
Got it, thank you.
Yep, you're welcome. All right, well-formed HTML. So we already talked about stuff being lowercase. We already talked about indentation and tabbing things over when something is inside of another tag, all right? And that's pretty much all I'm worried about, okay? Really, you want your code to be readable, all right? Now, if I go into my code right here and I said, oh yeah, I actually want all of this to show up on the same line, I could do that, okay? And my code would still run, all right? It's not a matter of if the compiler could understand it, my code would still run just fine, but it's really hard to see what's going on here, So what I want to do is have things indented anytime I'm inside of another tag, and just kind of leave it like this, like well-formed HTML. All right, required elements. Now, this is straight from your book, all right? This syntax highlighting this screenshot was taken in Sublime, the text editor Sublime. But these are the required elements for HTML. So if I were you, I would save these 2, 4, 6, 8, 9 lines of code into a template HTML document. Then anytime you have to start a new assignment, you can just copy that template file into a new file called assignment 4.1 or whatever for week 4. And you don't have to remember this and remember to type this every single time. All right. You will never, ever have to have this memorized. If you have a template file that has this in it, I allow you guys to use all your programs on your exams. You can use them for future assignments and everything, So if you just make a template file like this once that works, then you never have to worry about it again. You just copy that template file again, and you can start coding, just right where you need it. So these are the required elements. This title, I don't think I talked about the title, what it does. Let me go back to my text editor. I have a title right here called 4.3 template. All right, if I save this, go over here. Let me copy this file path so I can show you guys what's going on. And I'll run it. You can see 4.3 template shows right up here in the browser tab. That's where the title ends up. Okay. All right, any questions on any other one of these elements in HTML? Okay. All right, going through an example. So just start to finish, all right, if I was going to look at one of our assignments, let's go through using a text editor, common errors, how many tags you should have, a template file, and then how to run it in the browser. Okay, so again, if I wanted to start up a template, okay, I would actually probably go into modules and go to your book, to chapter 3 of your book. So I'm going to go up to chapter 3, HTML basics. Come on, computer, you can do it. All right, and then in here, if I just search for required, there we go, required elements. So I would just copy this. Here it says every HTML5 document should have all of these. So I would just copy that, and I would open up a new file. All right, and then I would save that as like a template.html. Okay. Now for my template, I would want to have it well formatted. Okay. And so each time I have something inside of something else, I would want to have things tabbed over. Then in here, I could put like an H1 tag, say this is my template file, and I could change this header whenever I copy this. And then I might want a paragraph and say, this is a temporary paragraph. Okay. Now, I have a nice looking HTML file right here. If I wanted to start a new assignment, I would just hit Control A to select everything, Control C to copy it, Control N to make a new file, and Control V to paste. And then right here, I could be like, oh, this is assignment week 3, I'll say like week 3, assignment 1, .html. That's really important. Okay. And then in here, I could be like, oh, this is an awesome business. And then a couple of paragraphs, and then I could copy this path again, go over to my browser, paste that path. So look, this is just straight from my C drive, and I can run it in my browser, and here's my HTML file. Okay. I recommend you have some sort of folder structure. You don't have to have it split out by chapter if you don't want it to be, but I would at least say have a folder for all of your programs. And then in your text editor, you can say File, Open Folder, and then it'll display all of your files on the left-hand side, kind of like it's doing for mine. Okay. Now, common errors. Let's say I left out this /. All right. Let's see what happens. If I run this, look at that. All of these just became a heading because I never closed my heading. So the way that my computer's seeing this is it's seeing all these paragraphs inside of this heading tag because I never closed it. All right. Once I close it, then it'll be like, oh, it's over and we can do something else. But for now, it was just seeing it as these inside of it because I didn't close it. Okay. So that's one common error. Another common error, probably the most common for these first couple of weeks, is let's say I copy my template and I save it in a new file, and I'll just say week 3 assignment 1. Okay. Now, I didn't save it as an HTML file. It just says .txt. There's no syntax highlighting, which would be horrible. I can copy my file path and I can paste it in my browser, and I'm going to run it. And look at that nice code. Not being rendered, not being executed, just being printed because this is a text file. Okay. My browser knows that with a text file, it just displays it. It doesn't render anything. It doesn't have to convert any code into anything else. But with HTML, it knows that it has to actually render it. Okay, that's a huge error. Okay, a huge mistake that is made by a lot of different people. Okay. All right. Any questions on starting an assignment, saving it, running it in your browser, anything like that?
Oh, everything is understandable. Thank you.
Okay, awesome. Thanks, Rest. All right. So just going over the chapter a little bit, we talked about HTML. I didn't tell you guys this, but it is short for Hypertext Markup Language. And it is used to program the web. All right. So if you're ever going to be doing anything with websites, or depending on the type of technology, mobile apps, you will be using a lot of HTML. All right. If anyone talks to you about HTML 3 or 4 or lower, it is so out of date. So all we worry about is just HTML5. Okay. It must have those essential elements that we talked about. It is composed of many tags, and there's no limit to how many tags. If I wanted a billion paragraphs right here, I could put a billion paragraphs right here, and I could copy this, and I could run it, and I could see what that looks like. You know, so there's no limit to the number of tags that you can have. Void tags don't require a closing tag. All right, this is important because you guys have to use inputs this week. So let me show you guys a couple examples of void tags. Meta. All right, notice there's no closing tag that shows meta right here. All right, because it doesn't exist. Meta is one of the few void tags, which just means it only has an opening tag. It doesn't have a closing tag. Another one is document HTML. No closing tag. Another one is input. Okay. That input, there's no such thing as a closing input tag. All right. So I just have an input. I could say type text. If I wanted an ID in there, I could say unique input or whatever. And this is my input. Okay. It doesn't have a closing tag. All right. Those are void tags. All right. HTML is not case sensitive. Okay. So again, if I wanted to make this input, I could, and it would still work just fine. And HTML tags should be properly nested. That's talking about the indentation again. So if I have something inside of my body, I should put it inside of the body of the document. I should tab it over so it's easy to see. If for whatever reason I had multiple things inside of my header right here, let's say I had a couple of paragraphs, you know, I would want to have it nested over so that I could see very clearly where my header starts and where it ends. And then I could run this and see what that looks like. You know, there's my 2 paragraphs inside of my header. Here's my input that I can type anything in, and then here's all my paragraphs. Okay. All right, you guys. Any questions or anything you want to see me do again, or anything that didn't make sense?
Could you explain button for us real quick? Like what do we have to have and what's needed to make the button work?
Great question. Okay, so I'm going to go to my best friend here, Google, and I'll just type in HTML button. All right, W3 Schools comes up, and it shows me how to write a button. Okay, now notice a couple of things. It is not a void tag. All right, it has an opening and a closing tag. All right, and on this tag are 2 attributes: type button and on-click alert hello world. Okay. So remember when I said that the only place in an HTML file where you will have JavaScript is inside of the head where you have a script tag. This is going to be where JavaScript is. Notice the syntax highlighting. It's green for a comment, similar to if I put a comment right here, it's green for a comment. But if I try to put an HTML comment right here, it's not green, and it's going to give me some JavaScript errors because this is not a comment in JavaScript. Okay, so we'd have a different language right here. But the other place where I'm going to have JavaScript code is inside of my on-click attribute button. So to have a button work, let's say I have this, this input, lowercase. Let's say I have a button right here. Okay, we know it needs a closing tag. VS Code will finish that tag for you, which is another nice thing about text editors. In here, I need a type. Okay, and then in between my tags, I should have the text of what I want my button to say. So I could say, push this button. Okay. Now, what that looks like. If I ran this, that's not, there we go. If I ran this, here's my button. It says push this button, and it doesn't do a thing, but I can push it. All right. If I take off this button type right here, it should still work. Okay. But on your buttons, you'll want button type button, not text. Sorry, guys. For your inputs, you want type text. For your buttons, you'll want type button. Okay. But like I said, Google Chrome will help you out with that, and it'll set that to a default if you didn't specify it. Okay. So I have this button, and I can push it, but nothing happens. All right. The way we're going to be using buttons throughout the semester is you'll have an on-click attribute, which will allow you to type JavaScript code. All right. So I could say, say hello, and I could call a function. And as long as I have a function called say hello in my JavaScript, then it'll execute that function. All right. Notice it changed some of the syntax highlighting right here because it's recognizing this as JavaScript. But then in here, let's say I had like an alert. I say hello. Okay. Alert is something that's built into JavaScript that will give you a little pop-up. All right. Now you'll notice in the W3 Schools example, they just typed an alert function right in here. So instead of calling a function that I made inside my script tag, it just called an alert function in JavaScript. And as soon as I click this, it'll alert hello world. All right. Well, if I refresh mine, okay, I can push my button and it says hello. All right. Now, if I look at my button, it shows that on the click, I will call the function say hello. Well, inside of say hello, the only thing I'm doing is calling the alert function, and I'm saying hello. Okay. So really the only thing you need to have a button work and do something is the on-click attribute. Okay. And within that on-click attribute, you would have to have something in JavaScript to say what you want it to do. Does that help, Colt?
Yes, and then with the input, how it says type equals text, then the ID, does it matter how you put that? Could you put the ID first?
Nope. Nope. You can put the attributes in any HTML element in whatever order you want. Good question. Okay, any other questions, you guys? Okay, well, I have been recording this whole time, so I'm going to post the recording to our video spreadsheet as soon as it is ready. But if you guys have any questions during the week while you're working on your assignments or anything, just post to Slack to the help channel, and we'll get you some help. So thank you guys for coming, and I hope you have a fantastic week.
Thank you so much, you too.
Okay, bye guys.
Next.